mean, from what I've seen and experienced, this role of a product manager has not really been a traditional kind of role, at least in the Indian market or the Indian context. If you look at something like consulting or a development role, that's fairly well defined, it's fairly well established. So naturally, in a situation like this, when a role is fairly new and its sources of entry are not really well defined, you have people coming in from all sorts of different backgrounds, and due to that very fact, each has their own set of skills and experiences and their strengths that you can leverage or fine tune or tailor to a product role. And along with the strengths that you built over your previous experiences, there are definitely those areas or those blind spots which for no fault of your own, tend to get ignored. It's like when you don't actively work on something, it tends to atrophy and grow weak. So naturally, when you find yourself eventually in a product role, there you have to be that much more aware of what you know, number one, but more importantly what you don't know, or what can be your blind spots. So if I were to say or list out, let's say, a couple of challenges that I've at least come across, is that a B2B sort of a product role, especially in a B2B context, tends to be like a more generalist profile, in the sense that there's so many aspects of the entire product lifecycle that have to be uh, you know handled or guided, and typically there are not enough hands or there are not enough headcount to essentially uh, execute those phases in as optimally or as ideally as one would prefer. So you're involved in everything from wireframing to working with developers to interacting with customers, and doing the not so glamorous parts, such as testing your own product, or trying to see what gaps are really there in the product, and portraying that or conveying that to other stakeholders in your organization. So I typically look at it like there's these different phases or different seasons in an entire life cycle, and depending on what time or what phase of the life cycle you're in, you're either explaining the big picture to upper management, or you're really going into the granular level details of how your product is working with a customer or your internal development team. So it's kind of a generalist profile, in the sense that you're never sure, or you can't really say that, hey, last week I was doing this, so I can expect to be doing something on these lines 3 weeks from now. So depending on what part of the life cycle you're in, your responsibilities or your deliverables change. So that's number one. Number two is, in a product role, you would typically inherit a product, and so essentially the onus is on you to essentially get down to details of the product, get down to get really hands on in the kind of use cases and scenarios that your product is enabling. So that need for a learning mindset or a continuous learning mindset is that much more important. And if you look at, I mean, if I take a look at my own experience, I moved from infrastructure to data analytics to product in a couple of different domains, and in none of those scenarios did I ever work or enter the role from ground zero. There was always a backlog of items, so to say, to learn and pick up and become the expert on. And in my current role, that probably still is a work in progress. But still, there's some sort of entry point or a foundation which you hope to have, but there's this continuous need to always build on that. So that learning mindset is probably number two, which I would say. And I mean, the most important part, I would say, is having empathy for an end user who would use the product. So that's a continuous challenge, because again, depending on the kind of product that you inherit, its its users are coming from different backgrounds and they have different motivations and needs, that is driving them to use your product. So you really have to put yourself in their shoes to understand what would really work for them or what would not, and what is really the optimal way to deliver a feature, or any sort of solution to them. So yeah, I mean, if I were to put it in another way, you really have to shift your gears depending on who you're talking to. So that's a constant challenge. And uh, in more traditional or defined roles, at least the last part of having to focus or put yourself in someone else's shoes, I would say does not happen to that large of an extent, because in my own experience as someone managing IT infrastructure, you always know what you're working with, and you know the kind of people who will come to you. So there's probably a constant factor over there. And in an analytics role, you are, let's say, familiar with your own product, your boundaries, and your envelope of experience that you're comfortable with, and the kind of insights or how you want to present your insights uh, is fairly structured. I mean, depending on the kind of engagement that you're in. But at least my experience, I said, has been that in a product role, that tends to fluctuate slightly more, and that's something which I did not probably I wasn't that aware of, or I didn't really know what how that would transpire for me in terms of day to day sort of roles and responsibilities. Yeah.